Shabbat shalom to everyone. We're going to commence our service on page 124. Top of the page. We enter this sanctuary to welcome Shabbat. Within these walls, we sit surrounded by numberless generations. Our ancestors built the synagogue as a visible sign of God's presence in their midst. Throughout our long history and our endless wanderings, it has endured, a beacon of truth, love, and justice for all humanity. Its presence guided our ancestors to lives of righteousness, holding up to them a vision of their truest selves. Now we, in our turn, come into this sanctuary to affirm the sacredness of our lives. May we enter this place in peace. May holiness wrap around us as we cross its threshold. Weariness, doubt, the flaws within our human hearts, the harshness of the weak, let these drop away at the door. In the brightness of Shabbat, let peace settle upon us as we lift our hearts in prayer. Our service continues now with the lighting of the Shabbat candles. Thank you.
As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvosav v'tivanu, v'chatat meir shel Shabbat.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, lechad likneh shel Shabbat.
Our service continues now with the singing of Ma Tovu, the full Ma Tovu, which may be found on page 630.
Ma tovu alecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu alecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Vayni v'rochastecha avovitecha. Ma tovu alecha Yaakov. ישראל, מה טובו אוהליך יעקב, משכנותיך ישראל, משכנותיך ישראל.
And our service continues now with Lecha Dodi, the traditional Lecha Dodi, page 138 through 139, as we welcome the spirit of the Shabbat.
Lecha Dodi ligrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi ligrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi, Lecha Dodi ligrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi ligrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המאוחד, אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשמו תפארת ולתהילה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לכוון אלך, כי מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם ניסוחה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תכלה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
As we welcome the Shabbat, verse 9.
ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצולה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לך דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
You may be seated. This week, I invited the congregation to submit poems or lyrics to songs that had moved them in some important way. And we had a number of people who responded. Some of them are actually here this evening and some are online. The idea being that we all pray in certain ways, and prayer is little more than poetry, which stands for something much deeper than just the words on the page. We try to express those things that are deep within our hearts that sometimes we find difficult to express in the limits of our communications to one another. And prayer represents the deepest of our thoughts. So there's two types of prayer. One which is public prayer, like when we light the Shabbat candles, when we sing L'Chadodi. But then there is prayer that is kavanah, which is intentional prayer, prayer that is of the heart. And the Talmud tells us that if you haven't added something personal to your communal prayers, if you haven't prayed from something that's deep within your heart, it's as if you have not prayed at all. So I invited people to submit poems that really touch their heart that we could add to our service each week. The first one that I'd like to read, because it connects us in very important ways, whether to all the people who are on Zoom, and there's a number of people on Zoom. We have actually about 20 people, 20 different individuals who have zoomed in, but there's more than that, probably closer to 26 to 28, because there's couples that have joined. So we add that to that. So we have together, and we're connected in so many different ways. And so as we begin the Ma'ariv service, the evening part of our service, now that we've welcomed the Shabbat with the beautiful candle lighting service and the chanting of the Chadodi and Matovu, words of welcome, now we come to the more kavanah, more of the intentional pieces that are important for our devotion, for our worship together, and what we add to our hearts, and what we add from our hearts. So the first is a poem that was written by Roy Hoffman, and during the start, just as a way of introduction, this is from a cycle of poems of March and April of 2020. And I'll just add the following: that during the start of the pandemic and quarantine in spring of 2020, the author of this poem, Roy Hoffman, wrote numerous poems and meditations in his notebooks on what he was experiencing. The first several of these were included in an art show at the Eastern Shore Arts Center in Fairhope. And the first of these was inspired by a sermon by the previous rabbi, Rabbi Howard Kosofsky, and how appropriate it is that we recite this poem this evening. It's called Intertwined, and because we really are intertwined with one another. On a first sultry night, beneath a silver moon surrounded by the shimmering light of a quiescent bay, he sat in the middle of a pandemic. If it were only him in the world, it would seem another of his fictions, invented tales to reach a deeper truth. But the rabbi had said in the virtual service where none could touch but came together to pray, we are all intertwined. So he sat alone, but was not. What others endured, he could not turn away. If others gasped, he listened to their inhalations, exhalations. If their families wept behind glass, he heard them too. The absence of any human, as far as he could see, was the sounding of an alarm, a voice, reminding we are close. And with that beautiful prayer of interconnection, let us rise for two of the most sacred prayers in all of our liturgy, the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144, followed by the Barhu on page 146. Continue with the Baruch Hu. You may be seated. Let us continue now on page 147. In the middle of the page, we join in prayer. O God, you are as near as the very air we breathe, yet farther than the farthermost star. We yearn to reach you, we seek the light and warmth of your presence. Though we say you are near, we are lonely and alone. Oh, let our desire be so strong that it will treat the veil that keeps you from our sight. Let your light release our darkness and reveal the glory and joy of your presence. Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim. And we continue now with the Ahavat Olam, page 150. And at the completion of the Ahavat Olam, we will continue with the Shema and the Baruch Shem on page 152. with V'ahavta.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להוד על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתיכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
You may be seated. And before our service continues, we want to welcome everyone who is on Zoom. We want to welcome Howard and Patricia Silverman, Mel Sternberg, Nate and Iris Ginsberg. Again, there may be more than one person. Their names aren't here because we're only looking at the bottom of the screen. Harold and Emily Fink, Shirley, Roy Hoffman, whose poem we just read. We thank you, Roy, for that. Diana Kubat, Priscilla Gold Darby, Jonathan Fratkin, Cole and Ellie Appleman, Richard and Diane Frank, Marion Birkin, Amy and Jack Friedlander, Phyllis Feibelman, Nicole, James, Ralph, and I'm going to assume that it may be Ralph Holberg and his wife Sandy, who is celebrating a birthday, Diane Frank, who I just mentioned, and Leonard Wells. So we welcome you to our service, and we can, through this virtual reality, we can sense your presence. We now come to the prayer of the Micha Mocha, which is about the crossing of the Red Sea. It is taken from the Song of the Sea that is attributed to Moses. And it's really about the heroism of choice in the midst of choosing freedom with the risk of drowning or returning to slavery. And there is a midrash that goes something like along these lines. What was it that narrated the children of Israel so that God would split the sea, as we're about to chant? And one individual, when saw the Egyptians approaching, instead of either turning back or freezing, he chose to go forward. And as the waters reached his neck and he was about to drown, at that point, the seas parted. So that in the idea, perhaps, is that in the creation of miracles, of things that we want to happen, we have to participate in them and do everything we can. And so I'm choosing to read a very beautiful lyric that was submitted by Larry Miller, who is sitting in the back, and we thank you for this submission. It is from the Broadway play Carousel by Rodgers and Hammerstein, and the lyrics are by Oscar Hammerstein II, and it's "You'll Never Walk Alone." When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of a storm, there's a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. Thank you. We continue now with the Mi Chamocha on page 158.
Please join in with me. This one may be familiar to some of you, although I feel like I should sing what he just read. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha neder b'chodesh, nora tehilot osefele, nora tehilot osefele, ma'alechutecha ranu banecha, bokei hayam b'pnei Moshe Miriam, zeheli zeheli anu ve'amru Adonai imno le'olam vayed, yabba bim bim bam, yabba bim bam, yabba bim bim bam, yabba bim bam, ay 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 ay, yabba bim bam, ay 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 ay, yabba bim bam, v'ne'emar ki fadadonai et Yaakov ugolo mi'achaza mimenu. Baruch atah Adonai Ge'ai Yisrael.
On page 160, in the middle of the page, let us join in prayer. Grant, O God, that we lie down in peace and raise us up, our guardian, to life renewed. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Guide us with your good counsel. For your name's sake, be our help. Shield and shelter us beneath the shadow of your wings. Defend us against enemies, illness, war, famine, and sorrow. Distance us from wrongdoing. For you, God, watch over us and deliver us. For you, God, are gracious and merciful. Guard our going and coming to life and to peace evermore. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom aleinu, v'al kol amo Yisrael v'al Yerushalayim. We continue now with the Vishamru on page 162.
V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et Shabbat, la'asot et Shabbat, l'dorotam, berit olam. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et Shabbat, la'asot et Shabbat, l'dorotam, berit olam. Beini uvein bnei Yisrael, oti le'olam. Beini uvein bnei Yisrael, oti עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ וביום השביעי שבת וינפש. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
We now rise for the Amidah, the Tefillah, begins on page 164, and then continuing on page 168 through page 170, right, through page 170.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agita hilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu ve'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Hagel, Hagadol, Hagibor ve'Nahorah, Elyon, Gomei Chasadim Tovim, V'konei hakol, V'socher chasdei avot v'imahot, U'bavi geula לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ויצרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רע להושיע. מחכה לחיים
בחסד, בחיי רחוב ורחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצביע ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מקיים הכל. אתה חדוש ושמך חדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
And we continue in our own silent meditations from page 170 through page 180. And when you've completed your davening, of course, either you may be seated and pray, or as may be your custom, you may stand as well. Our service continues now with the Shalom Rav, page 178.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki atah Melech Adon lekol hashalom. Ki atah Melech Adon lekol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'to beinecha levarech et Amcha Yisrael b'chol עת ובחושך בשלומך. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael
Shabbat Shalom to everyone. And Shabbat to everyone who is on Zoom with us. It's wonderful to have so many people here. There is a famous line from the film League of Our Own. No, not the one where Tom Hanks screams, "There is no crying in baseball." Instead, the one in which he is forced to retire in describing why he no longer plays baseball, because he has no cartilage in his knees and because he is an alcoholic. And in a very poignant moment, he reflects and states, "We become so useless so fast." Yes, the crowd stopped cheering so fast when we leave the game. It becomes a metaphor for many of us who believe that our most important work is behind us. What do we do with ourselves once we are no longer, quote, in the game? Noah's life, the subject of this week's portion, mirrors this dilemma. Noah is first described in the portion as tzaddik b'dorotav, a righteous person in his generation, because he saved humankind and all the species of plants and animals. He hearkened unto God, didn't ask for any proof, and endured and succeeded in overcoming the deluge of the flood that wiped out humanity and the earth according to the Torah. And for me, when I read this story, this is where the real challenge begins. After the flood, after Noah comes out of the ark, Noah is described as the first tiller of the field, an ish ha'adamah, a person of the ground, and it plants a vineyard. Vayeta et hakaram, he plants literally a vineyard. And after that, in the very next verse, the Torah provides vayesh yayin vayishkor. He drank wine and became drunk. And as a result, he committed the sin of erva, loosely translated as naked, but implies something worse than that, and then fell asleep inside the tent. One of his children, Yafet, sees his father and tells both Ham and Shem. Upon hearing this, the latter two sons take hold of a blanket and begin walking backward into the tent, so as not to gaze upon their father's nakedness and cover him. They do so out of an extraordinary sense of tsinu'ah, modesty, and kavod, respect for their father, even at a time when Noah has disgraced himself. Let us now turn to a midrash, a deep, penetrating study of the biblical text. In this particular midrash, there is an element of disdain for our Savior of the world. A midrash based on the root of the Hebrew states that Noah was degraded and debased. Why was he degraded and debased? The midrash first answers, Vayeta et hakaram. He planted a vineyard, thus becoming drunk and naked before his children. And then the midrash becomes even more unrelenting. Should he not have grown something to repair the world, such as a fig branch or a young olive shoot? Instead, he planted a vineyard. The midrash continues, how did he procure such shoots to plant a vineyard? Citing an earlier passage, the midrash states, V'asafta elecha. God tells Noah to gather for yourself. Yasafta, you shall gather elecha for yourself, for your benefit, types of food that you will need. Thus Noah gathered grape shoots, the midrash concludes, knowing that he would require to plant a vineyard to produce wine, which would lead him to be degraded and debased. The midrash is clear in condemning Noah's self-centeredness. The midrash concludes with a short discussion of understanding the difference between Moses and Noah, and herein lies an important lesson for us. Noah, in the Torah's description, began as a tzaddik, a righteous person, and his life ended in disgrace, humiliation, because he was only concerned with himself, his pleasure, and the immediate world around him. He was only an ish ha'adamah, a man of the earth, the first tiller of the soil as translated by the Sansino edition of the Midrash. However, Moses is more enduring. Why? Moses begins his life as an Ish Mitzri, an Egyptian man. He lived in a culture of power and domination over lives far less fortunate. However, as his life nears its end, he is described as Ish HaElohim, a man of God. And Moses, as we've learned previously, spent his last days writing a Torah for each of the 12 tribes. And as the end drew near, he then placed an additional Torah in the ark next to the tablets of stone and the broken shards of the first tablets. Even unto death, Moses was true to a truly altruistic mission, transforming a group of slaves into a people that had the tools to now endure over millennia. The Midrash suggests, I think, something profound about how we are to understand the life of Noah on one level, and that is how to live life fully. Life's work is never over if we dedicate ourselves to a higher purpose that improves the human condition. The sacred work never stops. However, feelings of uselessness will. In our younger years, like Moses, there is our immersion in the greater culture. Moses was an Egyptian man who had everything, but he made a severe break and dedicated himself to something much more, to freedom, law, and to transforming a slave people into one that became a people with a great mission. And in this way, Moses was transformed to become a person of God, earning the title of Ish HaElohim, a person of God. Noah began, in contrast, as a righteous person. He did as God told him, and even though his righteousness stemmed from hearing the command of God and thus saved the world from extinction, Noah had done his life's work, or so he thought. Perhaps he felt, according to the Midrash, that he could now engage in a life of self-indulgence. For this, Midrash describes Noah as a tragic lesson to learn from, rather than one deserving of emulation. Now, before I conclude this Devar Torah, I want to pause for just a moment and critique this Midrash, for it fails to account for something we know now that can shape our lives, and that is trauma. By any description, the flood narrative is traumatic. God destroyed Noah's world. Noah didn't ask for that to happen. Noah didn't participate in that. He was entirely uprooted. And when it all ended, there were no inhabitants save for Noah and his family. There were few animals and birds that now must begin to replenish the earth. But having survived this terrible ordeal, perhaps from a psychological perspective, Noah felt enough, that he needed rest, that he needed calm, and a life where he felt connected to a land that only a short while ago God had covered completely with water. Can we now hold Noah accountable? Can we really criticize him for wanting this calm, settled, and peaceful life, something that all of us yearn for at some level, especially as we sense our life's work is behind us? know from my limited reading of the various midrashim on Noah, these works do not account, these midrashim do not account for the severe traumas, psychological and emotional impact. And we know that some people never recover. Every human being, especially those who experience a life-threatening traumatic event, need time to heal. They need a calm environment. If we are to avoid the trappings of Noah's decision to plant a vineyard, then we cannot see ourselves as being fulfilled, or that the experience of trauma gives us permission to live a life of indulgence. We cannot let trauma define our purpose or mission in life. Judaism teaches us to become Ish HaElohim, to be persons of God, to dedicate our life to something beyond ourselves. The pathway to a tzaddik gamor, an utterly righteous person, is to avoid placing limitations on the historical circumstance in which one finds him or herself. May it come to pass that we learn from Noah, not in a hypercritical way, but that we cannot allow trauma to define us or shape the remainder of our life. That one way out of trauma is to never see our lives in terms of a defining moment. We can be anashim adamim, people of the earth, grounded in its reality, to all that that term encompasses in the reality of our lives. But at the same time, we can become anashim Elohim, people of God who are devoted to something beyond ourselves and our parochial concerns. May we always be dedicated to tikkun olam, to planting seeds that will benefit our world and humanity. Shabbat shalom. Our service continues now on page 371 with the Misha Berach prayer.
Please join me in chanting and praying.
מקור הברכה לאמותינו. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen.
Rhoda Bennett, Paul Bradley, Harold Fink, Charmaine Mosier, Bruce Mosier, Mark Schoenfeld, and Mark Siegel. I now turn to the people on Zoom and ask that they unmute themselves and share the names of those in need of healing.
Dr. John Johnson and Dr. Knut Mueller.
Judy Stein, Sally Cohen, Pat Bloom.
Patricia's sister, Carmen, and Callie Weaver.
Turn to now our congregation. All those who are suffering the effects of COVID, and all those who are in hospitals and under special care.
Please join me again.
מי שברך אמותינו מכור הברכה לאבותינו. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Please rise for the Alenu, page 586. You may be seated. This week, we observed the yard sites of Fanny Silverstein, Rose Zalowski, Faye Ennis, Donald Lewis Prager, Samuel Brown, Corley Neese, Mrs. Ray Werner, Matilda Bauman, Saul Mayer, and Kurt Mulfelder. We also extend our deepest condolences to Anne Zelniker on the passing of her father, Joseph LeMay, excuse me. Is there anyone observing a yard site or saying Kaddish for someone who they wish to remember? First the congregation. Thank you. Now I'll ask those on Zoom to unmute themselves and to recite and to recite the names of those whom they're saying Kaddish for.
Mammy Grossman,
In preparation for the recitation of the Kaddish, I thought it appropriate to read another submission, this one by Steve Mulfelder, who is observing a yard site. And he submitted a beautiful poem called Epitaph by Merritt Malloy. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother, walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around everyone and give them what you need to give to me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live on in your eyes and not your mind. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. In solemn testimony to that unbroken faith, which links generations one to another, let all of us rise now and join in the recitation of the Kaddish, page 598. Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shmei Rabbah, Bialma divrachi rute, Viamlich malchute, V'chayechon uvyomechon, V'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala uvizman kariv imru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mevorach leolam ulalmeol maya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, v'yitala, v'yitalal, shemei de kudsha perichu. Ve'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, da'amiran bi'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. May God, who establisheth peace unto the heavens, grant peace and comfort in the hearts of all who mourn, and let us say, Amen. You may be seated. So, moving from a serious and sensitive state to one of celebration, We now have some birthdays and anniversaries to announce. For this past week, Nancy Brown, Randy Fink, Katie Fink, Nancy Hoffman, Gary Fishbein, Jeff Friedman, Sandy Holberg, all are celebrating birthdays this past week. And we also want to extend a happy anniversary. Today is the anniversary of Karen and Harry Singh. So first, let's join in the singing of the Shechianu, and then we'll sing happy birthday, and happy anniversary will include those words as well. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechiyanu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. You want to read us some happy birthday? And when we say happy birthday and anniversary too, we'll pause and we'll add the names of people whose birthdays we're celebrating. Happy birthday to you. Okay.
Please join me, don't let me sing alone. You too, on Zoom.
Yes.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday anniversary to
Gotta work on this.
everyone.
I gotta have
He's
the
gonna
names
say it
down
all.
here. Nancy Brown, Randy Fink, Katie Frank, Nancy Hoffman, Gary Fishbein, Jeff Friedman, Sandy Holberg, and happy anniversary to Karen and Harry Singh.
Happy birthday to you. I'm not
We'll
used
get this right. This is our first
Not
time,
used
and
to
we didn't rehearse this ahead of time, so we'll do better next time for sure. It's my fault. I put you on the spot. Yeah, I'm not sure we can post this on YouTube. I understand that the people who wrote the happy birthday song demand royalties if you.
No, it actually is, it's now copyright free.
Oh, okay.
It reached, what is it, 75,
Oh,
78
okay.
years old.
All right, good.
Now officially does happy birthday.
Probably don't have to worry about that now. One less thing.
The rest of the music is saying that.
Okay. Let's see. Next week will be a tour study on Wednesday from 5:30. We'll continue with our study of Bereshit. We try to do a chapter a week. Chapter 3 is the story of Adam and Eve and the service, the difficulties that they encounter in the Garden of Eden. So that's next week. We invite, of course, everyone to join us. It's a wonderful group, and you can join at any time. Are there any other announcements that people have? There is a federation meeting on Monday, but I don't think we need to be. I don't think you need to be concerned about that. I think okay. I have been wanting to do this song throughout the holidays, and I wasn't, for some reason, something always got in the way. Particularly during Sukkot, I wanted to sing it, and for some reason, we're never quite able to get it together. But if you turn to page, oh, wait a second, we have to do Kiddush, excuse me. Oh, excuse me. We have a special Kiddush today. We have halal.
Oh, yes. I think, did everyone get one when they walked in?
We want to thank Larry for putting that all together. Thank you. They're colored halot in honor of the rainbow. I think that's sort of the idea, wasn't it? The rainbow. Did everyone? What happened to my cantorial soloist? Oh, there she is. Oh, okay.
I'll do my favorite.
Please rise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kadsho b'yava uvratzon v'inchilanu. Zikaron l'maaseh v'reishi, kihu yom techila l'mikra'ei kodesh, zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, kivanu b'charta, kiltanu kidashta, mikol amim, v'shabbat kodshecha, v'yavo v'ratzon, inchaltanu, baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh ha-shabbat. Amen.
Should we do the full mercy?
Yeah, whatever you the cantor stories.
Oh, no, you put me on the spot now. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.
Do y'all have your challah? No? It's got sugar in it. Got some type of a sugar? Yeah. No, it's like a cinnamon.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry. Delicious. It pays to come to temple.
That's right.
And ish adamah. Larry followed the strict guidelines. They were in, he prepared them and then put them in plastic bags individually. So everyone, we have some good protection, and we thank you, Larry, so much for all the time and trouble it took to make really a large number of these. Thank you. Okay, and I want to thank everyone who submitted readings for this evening. Steve, thank you so much. Roy, and I know the other one that we read from, and Larry, Larry, you also submitted, and I encourage people each week that if there's a poem or a lyric that you find to be meaningful, please share it with us, and we'll incorporate it within the service. Okay, so as I said before, and it kind of fits the mood here. It's Bashana Haba'ah, and that can be found on page 652. Okay, everybody ready? How many of you know this song, actually know it? Just, have heard it or have sung it before, even just the chorus? Okay, so there's a few of you. You'll catch on. It's not too hard. Bashana haba'ah nesheva ha'merpeset v'mispar tzerafim nodedont ילדים בחופשה ישחקו נוספת בין הבית לבין השדה וכנפיים והשמש תזרח בתוכן everyone. תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. Shabbat shalom to everyone. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat